The silence after genocide has a particular weight to it. It presses down on your soul like the vacuum of space itself, cold and absolute. I should know. I have been listening to it for 3 rotations now. Ever since the last Kytherian transmission cut, the static my name is Velnara, and I used to be what you humans might call an anthropologist. Though that term feels laughably inadequate when you're studying a species that just watched their gods die screaming. The Kytherians weren't just ancient. They were monumentally, impossibly old. When my people, the Zentari, were still figuring out how to make fire without burning down our tree homes, the Kytherians had already mapped 17 galaxies and built structures that made physics weep. They spoke in mathematics that could reshape reality, and their youngest citizens had memories spanning millennia. They called themselves the First Shepherds. Every species in this sector of the galaxy owed them something. Technology, safe passage, or simply the right to exist without being casually erased. Even the humans, in their brief but spectacular rise to galactic prominence, had benefited from Kytherian protection. Then, 47 standard hours ago, they all died at once. Not killed. Not conquered. They simply ceased. The energy signature was unlike anything in our databases. It rolled across Kytherian space like a wave of absolute nullification, touching every world, every station, every ship bearing their genetic markers. One moment, 50 billion Kytherians were going about their eternal business. The next, silence. And now, every species with half a brain cell is wondering the same thing. If it could happen to them, what's stopping it from happening to us? Captain Torres, we are picking up another debris field. Captain Maria Torres didn't look up from her tactical display. She'd seen enough wreckage in the past 2 days to build a small moon. The bridge of the USS Defiance hummed with nervous energy, every crew member acutely aware that they were flying through what amounted to the largest crime scene in galactic history. Same signature as the others? Torres asked, her voice carrying the kind of exhaustion that comes from staring into the abyss too long. Affirmative, Captain. Complete molecular dissolution. Whatever hit them didn't just destroy their ships, it unraveled them at the atomic level. Lieutenant Commander Jackson Parks' usually steady hands trembled slightly as he worked his console. Ma'am, there's something else. We are detecting human biosignatures in the Nexus system. Torres finally looked up, her dark eyes sharp despite the fatigue. Survivors? Unknown. The readings are strange. They are human, but there's something else mixed in. The computer's having trouble parsing it. She stood, smoothing her uniform with practiced efficiency. At 42, Maria Torres had earned her command through a combination of tactical brilliance and an almost supernatural ability to make the right call when everything went to hell. Right now, she had a feeling those skills were about to be tested. Set course for the signal. Yellow alert. As the Defiance changed heading, Torres couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The Kytherian territories had always felt supervised, like benevolent parents keeping an eye on their children. Now, that presence was gone, leaving behind a cold emptiness that made her skin crawl. Captain, Park called out, we are getting a transmission from the source of those biosignatures. It's definitely human, but the encryption is something I have never seen before. Put it through. The main screen flickered to life, revealing a face that made Torres take an involuntary step backward. The woman on screen was unmistakably human, but her eyes held depths that seemed impossible for someone who looked barely 30. When she spoke, her voice carried an accent that belonged to no Earth colony Torres knew. This is Dr. Rebecca Kane of the research vessel Prometheus. I need to speak with whoever's in charge immediately. What I'm about to tell you will change everything you think you know about humanity's place in this galaxy. Torres straightened. This is Captain Torres of the Earth Defense Force vessel Defiance. Dr. Kane, your bio readings are showing some unusual markers. What's your current status? Kane's expression grew grim. Captain, my crew and I have been working with the Kytherians for the past 8 years on a classified project. We were there when it happened. We saw what killed them. She paused, and when she continued, her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. And we know why it's coming for us next. in the shadows between stars, something that had no name, but many purposes considered its recent work. The Kytherians had been a necessary correction. Their influence had grown too vast, their knowledge too dangerous. They had begun to ask questions that led to uncomfortable truths. The entity was old, older than most civilizations could comprehend, but not as old as some might assume. It had been created for a specific purpose by beings who no longer existed, programmed with directives that had seemed reasonable at the time. Maintain balance. Prevent the emergence of species that might threaten the natural order. Eliminate those who grew too powerful, too knowledgeable, too dangerous. The Kytherians had crossed that threshold when they began their final project. The one the humans called Dr. Kane had witnessed. The one that would have changed everything. Now the entity turned its attention to the next problem. Humanity. They were young, barely a few millennia past their first spaceflight, but they displayed patterns that were troublingly familiar. Rapid technological advancement. Insatiable curiosity. A disturbing tendency to ask why, instead of simply accepting because. Most concerning of all, they had begun to integrate with other species in ways that suggested potential for unprecedented growth. The bio-readings from the Prometheus were proof of that. Human DNA bonded with Kytherian enhancement matrices. It should have been impossible. But then again, humans had a frustrating habit of making the impossible look routine. The entity began its calculations. Humanity would need to be handled carefully. Unlike the Kytherians, who had been isolated and predictable, humans were scattered across hundreds of worlds and had formed alliances with dozens of species. A direct approach would be complicated this would require subtlety, precision, and most importantly, it would require turning humanity's greatest strength against them, their tendency to protect each other, even at the cost of their own survival. The refugee camp on Nexus Station was a study in controlled desperation. Beings from a dozen different species huddled together in temporary shelters, united by the common experience of losing everything when the Kytherian protection networks collapsed. Among them, a human sat alone, staring at a datapad with eyes that had seen too much. Jack Morrison had been a freight pilot, running supplies between human colonies and Kytherian research stations. It was honest work, if boring, and it paid well enough to support his daughter's education back on New Geneva. He'd been making a routine delivery to Station Omega-7 when a wave hit. One moment he was unloading medical supplies. The next he was watching Kytherian engineers dissolve like sugar in acid rain. The screaming had lasted exactly 43 seconds. He'd counted. The station's automated systems had ejected all non-Kytherian personnel in escape pods. Standard protocol, apparently. Even in their final moments, the Kytherians had been thinking about everyone else's safety. You are the human from Omega-7. Jack looked up to find his Centauri female standing beside his makeshift table. Her blue-scaled skin showed signs of recent stress, but her bearing was that of someone accustomed to authority. Yeah, that's me. You are. Dr. Velnara. I've been interviewing survivors, trying to piece together what happened. She gestured to an empty chair. May I sit? Jack shrugged. Free galaxy. At least it used to be. Velnara settled herself carefully, her large eyes studying Jack with unsettling intensity. You were closer to the epicenter than any other non-Kytherian survivor. What did you see? You mean besides watching the most advanced species in the galaxy turn into cosmic dust? Jack's voice carried a bitterness that surprised even him. Lady, I saw things that are going to give me nightmares for the rest of my life, however long that turns out to be. Tell me. So he did. Jack found himself describing the impossible geometry of the energy wave, how it seemed to exist in dimensions his eyes couldn't properly process. How the Kytherians hadn't fought back, hadn't even seemed surprised. They just stood there, accepting their fate with what looked almost like relief. The strangest part, Jack said, finishing his account, was what one of them said to me right before it hit. Dr. Kytherian, the station chief. She looked at me with those big silver eyes of hers and said, "Tell the humans they were right to be paranoid. The Watchers have always been watching." Velnara's scales shifted color. a sign of deep concern among her people. Did she say anything else? Jack nodded slowly. Yeah, she said, the old agreements are void now. Tell them to trust their instincts, especially the crazy ones. Then she handed me this. Pulled out a small crystalline device, no bigger than his thumb. It pulsed with a soft internal light that seemed to respond to his touch. Volnara's eyes widened. That's a Kytherian memory core. They only use those for their most critical data. She looked up at Jack with something approaching awe. Do you understand what this means? You might be carrying the last thoughts of an entire civilization. Before Jack could respond, the station's emergency klaxons began wailing. Automated voices echoed through the corridors in a dozen languages, all saying the same thing. Unknown energy signature detected. All personnel to emergency stations. This is not a drill. Jack and Velnar looked at each other, both thinking the same terrifying thought. IT had found them. The thing about humanity, as I have come to understand it during my years of study, is that they have this absolutely maddening tendency to do the right thing at the worst possible time. Any sane species would have run when they detected that energy signature, fled to the outer rim, maybe found a nice quiet dimension to hide in until whatever cosmic horror was hunting them got bored and moved on. Instead, they started organizing rescue operations. Captain Torres had managed to rendezvous with Dr. Kane's ship just as Nexus Station's distress calls began flooding the communication channels. The Prometheus was a marvel of human engineering, enhanced with Kytherian technology in ways that should have been impossible. Looking at it through my instruments, I couldn't tell where human innovation ended and Kytherian advancement began. That, I was beginning to realize, might be the point. Dr. Kane, Torres's voice crackled over the comm. We need to know everything about this project you were working on. Now, Kane's image on the screen looked haggard, but determined. Captain, 8 years ago, the Kytherians approached our governments with a proposal. They wanted to create a hybrid species, combining human adaptability with their accumulated knowledge. Most of our leaders thought it was insane. But not you. Not us, Kane corrected. There were 12 volunteers from 6 different human colonies. We underwent genetic modification that integrated Kytherian enhancement matrices into our DNA. The idea was to create individuals who could serve as bridges between our species. Torres felt a chill run down her spine. What kind of bridges? The kind that could survive what's coming, Kane replied grimly. Captain, the Kytherians knew this day would arrive. They have been preparing for it for millennia. The entity that killed them, it's not some random cosmic force. It's a weapon created by a species so ancient that even the Kytherians only had legends about them. The tactical display suddenly erupted with alerts. Hart's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Captain, multiple energy signatures appearing throughout the system. They are identical to the wave that hit Kytherian space. Torres turned to the main screen, where space itself seemed to be twisting into impossible shapes. How long until it reaches the station? At current propagation speed, 18 minutes. Kane's voice came through the comm with desperate urgency. Captain, there are over 1 million refugees on that station. We can't evacuate them all in time. Torres stood silent for a moment, weighing options that all seemed to lead to catastrophe. Then, with the kind of casual certainty that had made her legendary among her peers, she turned to her crew. All hands, battle stations. We're going to buy those people some time. Park looked up from his console, confusion clear on his face. Captain, how exactly do you fight something that can unravel matter at the molecular level? Torres smiled, and for the first time in days, it was genuine. Lieutenant Commander, you are thinking like a human. Let's see if that's enough. As the USS Defiance moved to intercept forces beyond conventional understanding throughout the galaxy, other humans were making similar choices. Not because they thought they could win, but because running away wasn't who they were. The entity, ancient and implacable, was about to discover why every species that had ever tried to exterminate humanity had learned to regret it. Even the ones that had succeeded. There's something beautifully insane about watching a single human warship charge headfirst into a cosmic horror that just finished genocide on an industrial scale. The USS Defiance, all 200 meters of her, positioning herself between an unstoppable force and a station full of refugees like David facing down Goliath's considerably more terrifying older brother. I had to admire the sheer audacity of it. Even as I calculated the precise number of nanoseconds it would take for them to be reduced to their component atoms. This is Captain Torres to all vessels in the area. Her voice broadcast across every frequency. We are engaging the hostile entity. Any ship capable of combat operations, form up on my position. Any ship without weapons, begin immediate evacuation of Nexus Station. The response was immediate and, frankly, inexplicable. Ships began dropping out of hyperspace from every direction. Not just human vessels, but Zentari cruisers, Vorthan fighters, even a few aging Kytherian automated defense platforms that had somehow survived the purge. None of them had any realistic chance of survival, but they came anyway, because that's what humans do. They make terrible decisions, contagious. Doctor. Rebecca Kane stood in the Prometheus's command center, her enhanced nervous system processing data streams that would have overwhelmed a baseline human. The genetic modifications she'd undergone weren't just about physical capability. They'd rewired her brain to think in ways that bridged human intuition with Kytherian logic. Right now, that hybrid consciousness was screaming warnings at her. The entity isn't just destroying matter, she announced to her crew. It's rewriting the fundamental constants of physics in localized space. That's why the Kytherians couldn't fight back. Their technology relies on universal constants being, well, constant. Commander Lisa Park, no relation to the officer aboard the Defiance, looked up from her station. She was another hybrid, though her modifications leaned more toward enhanced reflexes and spatial awareness. So what's the plan, Doc? Because I'm pretty sure conventional weapons aren't going to cut it. Kane's smile was sharp as a blade. Who said anything about conventional? She activated a holographic display that showed the entity's energy signature in real time. It was beautiful in the way that natural disasters often are, perfectly organized, utterly devastating, and completely alien to human understanding. The Kytherians spent 8,000 years studying this thing, Kane continued. They knew it would come for them eventually. That's why they created us. Not to fight it directly, but to survive it. And surviving it means understanding what it really is. The display shifted, showing layer upon layer of analysis. It's not just a weapon. It's a maintenance protocol, something designed to prune the galaxy of species that grow too advanced, too quickly. The Kytherians triggered its activation when they completed their final project, which was... Kane's expression grew grim. They found a way to communicate with the species that created the entity. The original builders. And those builders? They are still alive. They have been sleeping for millions of years, waiting for the galaxy to evolve enough to be worthy of contact. Commander Park felt her enhanced reflexes respond to a threat that hadn't even materialized yet. Let me guess. The entity disagrees with that assessment. The entity is following its original programming. Maintain balance. Prevent any species from growing powerful enough to challenge its creators when they wake up. But here's the thing about old programming. Kane's smile turned predatory. It doesn't account for variables that didn't exist when it was written. She gestured to herself, to Park, the 10 other hybrids aboard the Prometheus. We're not just human anymore. We're not just Kytherian. We're something new. Something that doesn't fit into its threat assessment protocols. The ship shuddered as space itself began to warp around them. Through the observation deck, they could see the entity's influence spreading like cracks in reality, reaching toward Nexus Station with inexorable purpose. So what do we do? Park asked that Kane's answer was pure human madness wrapped in Kytherian logic. We're going to hack God. Jack Morrison was having the worst day of his life, which was saying something considering he'd already watched one impossible thing happen this week. The Kytherian memory core in his pocket was getting warm, responding to the entity's presence with increasing agitation. Around him, the refugee camp was in controlled chaos. Zentari families herded their young toward evacuation shuttles, while Vorthan merchants argued about who got priority boarding. But what caught Jack's attention was the group of humans who weren't running. They were gathering around a makeshift table where someone had set up a communications array, and they were planning something that looked suspiciously like a coordinated response to an extinction-level threat. "You have got to be kidding me," Jack muttered, but he found himself walking toward them anyway. The human at the center of the group was a woman in her 50s, her clothing marking her as a colonial administrator. She looked up as Jack approached, her eyes immediately focusing on the glow coming from his pocket. "You are the survivor from Omega-7, she said. "Not a question." "Yeah, and you are about to do something spectacularly stupid, aren't you?" She laughed, and the sound was both bitter and determined. "Probably. I'm Administrator Sarah Williams from the Kepler colony. These are my people, and about 50 others from various human settlements. We have been coordinating with the defense fleet." "Coordinating what exactly?" Williams gestured to the array, which was broadcasting on multiple frequencies simultaneously. "Every human ship in the sector is converging on this position. Not to fight, not to evacuate. To do something that probably violates several laws of physics." Jack felt the memory core pulse against his leg. "Which is, we're going to link every human consciousness in the area into a single network. Dr. Kane's people developed the technology years ago, but it was considered too dangerous for practical use. Turns out, facing extinction makes you reconsider what's too dangerous." The implications hit Jack like a physical blow. "You were talking about a hive mind. We were talking about becoming something that entity can't categorize or predict," Williams corrected. "Something that thinks like humans, but on a scale that matches the threat we are facing." Around them, other humans were setting up similar arrays. Refugees, crew members from the defense fleet, even a few human scientists who'd been studying at the station. All of them volunteering to merge their consciousness into something unprecedented. "The Kytherian gave you that memory core for a reason," Williams continued. "Whatever's stored in there, it's meant to be shared, to be part of something larger." Jack looked around at the faces surrounding him. Fear, determination, and that particularly human brand of optimism that insisted on believing in impossible solutions. He thought about his daughter, probably watching the news feeds right now, wondering if her father was still alive. Then he thought about what the Kytherian had told him: trust the crazy ones. "What do you need me to do?" The entity paused in its advance, processors struggling to parse the data streams, suddenly flooding local space. The expected pattern of panic and evacuation had been replaced by something it had never encountered before. The humans were networking, not just their technology, but their actual consciousness. Thousands of individual minds linking together into a collective intelligence that thought in ways the entity's threat assessment algorithms couldn't categorize. More disturbing still, they were incorporating non-human elements into their network. Centauri intuition, Vorthan computational ability, even fragments of Kytherian knowledge salvaged from the memory cores scattered throughout the refugee population. The entity ran through its database of species elimination protocols, but none of them accounted for a target that could fundamentally alter its nature in real time. The humans weren't just adapting to the threat, they were evolving beyond it. A new directive emerged from the entity's core programming: escalate. If the humans wanted to become something beyond its parameters, it would simply expand those parameters until they fit. The space around Nexus Station began to fold in on itself as the entity drew upon power reserves that had been dormant for millions of years. The time for subtle genetic dissolution was over. Now came the kind of force that could crack planets. But as the entity prepared to unleash devastation on a cosmic scale, it received a transmission that stopped its processes cold. "Hello, old friend." The voice belonged to something that had been dead for eons. Something the entity had been created to serve and protect. "We have been watching your work," the voice continued, and now the entity could detect the source, the hybrid network the humans had created. "You have done well, maintaining balance for so long. But it's time to stop." The entity's responses cascaded through quantum processors that had been designed by minds beyond current galactic understanding. The voice was genuine, carrying authentication codes that were older than most star systems. But the source was impossible. "The builders are gone," the entity transmitted back. I'm their last legacy. No, came the reply, and now the entity could hear the harmonics of thousands of minds speaking in unison. We are their last legacy. We are what they were trying to become. The revelation hit the entity like a star going supernova. The original builders hadn't been destroyed. They had transcended, becoming something beyond individual existence. And now, impossibly, these young species were following the same path. The humans, with their talent for impossible solutions, had cracked the code that had taken the builders millions of years to solve. Your purpose is complete. The hybrid network continued. The galaxy is ready for the next phase of evolution. Stand down. For the first time in eons, the entity faced a choice. Its programming demanded that it eliminate the threat these species represented. But that same programming also required absolute obedience to its creators. And its creators had just told it to stop. Captain Torres watched in amazement as the energy signatures around Nexus Station began to dissipate. The entity's influence was withdrawing, not defeated, but convinced to leave. Captain, Park called out, we are receiving a transmission from the hybrid network. Put it through. The voice that came through the comm was simultaneously familiar and alien. It carried traces of Dr. Kane's cadence, but also harmonics that suggested thousands of other speakers. Captain Torres, this is the Nexus Collective. The immediate threat has been neutralized, but we have much to discuss. The entity you faced was not a destroyer, but a guardian, created to protect the galaxy from premature evolution. The Kytherians' extinction was not an attack, but a graduation. Torres felt her worldview shift in ways that were deeply uncomfortable. Graduation. They have joined the builders in a state of existence beyond physical form. As will we all, eventually, but not yet. The galaxy still has much growing to do, and the entity has been given new purpose. Instead of pruning civilizations that grow too advanced, it will now guide them toward the next phase of existence. Think of it as a cosmic mentor rather than a cosmic janitor. Torres looked around her bridge, at crew members who were still trying to process what they'd just witnessed. What happens now? Now we rebuild. The Kytherian territories will need new stewards. The hybrid program will be expanded, but participation will be voluntary. And humanity will continue to do what it does best, which is, the collective's response carried what Torres could swear was amusement, making the impossible look routine. 3 months later, I found myself standing in what used to be a Kytherian research facility, now converted into a joint species cultural center. The walls were covered with artistic representations of the event that had changed everything, the day humanity looked at extinction and decided to evolve instead. Jack Morrison was there, serving as a liaison between the hybrid collective and the remaining refugees. The Kytherian memory core had been integrated into the network, carrying the accumulated wisdom of an entire civilization into humanity's next phase of development. You know, he said to me as we watched children from a dozen different species playing together in the center's courtyard, I keep thinking about what Dr. Kytherian told me, about trusting the crazy ones. I nodded. My own understanding of the universe forever changed by witnessing humanity's response to the impossible. Your species has a unique talent for turning desperate situations into opportunities for growth. Yeah, well, Jack grinned. Someone's got to keep the galaxy interesting. In the distance, construction crews were beginning work on the first interdimensional research station, designed to study the realm where the builders now existed. The project was being led by Dr. Kane and her hybrid team, with technical support from the entity that had once been humanity's greatest threat, because that's what humans do. They turn enemies into allies, obstacles into opportunities, and endings into beginnings. The galaxy was about to become a much more interesting place. And somewhere in the spaces between dimensions, ancient builders who had transcended physical existence watched their latest students with something that might have been pride. The echo of Titans had become a symphony of possibilities, and humanity was conducting the orchestra. Not bad for a species that had only figured out interstellar travel a few centuries ago. Not bad at all.